You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. The November 2015 issue of the Indonesian edition of National Geographic magazine is dedicated to the subject of climate change. It's also the first cover of National Geo that does not have a gorgeous picture on the cover. Instead of a picture, you're looking at big block letters that basically say, "Sorry, there are no beautiful pictures of climate change. Can we survive?" Our guests today are three photographers who have dedicated their time and efforts to photographing climate change, each from a different perspective. Are their photographs beautiful? In an unnerving way, many of them are. That's something we will discuss. Greg Kahn has been documenting the effects of climate change along Maryland's eastern shore in a project called 3mm. Everyday Climate Change, the Instagram collaborative project dedicated to documenting the various effects of climate change across 7 continents, is the name of a project that Kashi, a contributing photographer for National Geographic and the 7 Photo Agency, is involved with. Also joining us today is Carolyn Monastra, whose Witness Tree project illustrates through the use of words and pictures the state of the world around us and how it is changing. Welcome to each of you. Thank you for being here today. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to talk about. Let's start by each of you giving us a brief bio. And how did you get involved as photographers in the subject of climate change? Okay, Karen, let's start with you.
My background is actually as a fine artist. I have an MFA from Yale, and I had studied at Fordham University English literature many years ago. My background was really just in straight fine art photography, but then I did an artist residency in Iceland and was watching icebergs calve off of their largest glacier there. And the scene just kind of haunted me and stuck with me. And the following year, I heard an interview with activist Bill McKibben that really was the tipping point for me. And it just made me realize I didn't want to be doing just straight fine art photography anymore. I wanted to use my camera as a way to create action and inspire other people, hopefully, to get involved in the climate change issue.
Calving, that is supposed to have an amazing sound to go along with it. Am I right about that? It's supposed to have an incredible audio impact.
It's part of the problem is a lot of these things are beautiful. Yes.
Beautiful, but in a frightening kind of way.
I call it bittersweet.
Greg, tell us about what you're up to.
Well, I've been working on a project for the past 3 years on the eastern shore of Maryland, documenting sea level rise. And mine is really more looking at the land as the way that identity is shaped for the historic community that lives out there. So what happens is, as the land is washed away by the rising sea levels, the people have to find new ways of life, and things like historical aspects of their community are now changing.
Culture, if I'm not all
it's
around
it's a huge fishing culture. It kind of gets looked over because everyone goes over to the Delaware shore. Yeah. And so the eastern shore in the bay side kind of gets overlooked, but it does have the sea level rise at twice the global average. So what happens is they're not only getting sea level rise and erosion, they also have land that's sinking. So they're getting a combination of climate change factors that are slowly taking away their land.
Now, your project is called 3mm. What's that based on?
So 3mm is the average in which the sea level is rising. It's about the thickness of a dime. And so a lot of opponents will actually raise up a dime when they got hearings or committees and say, look, this is all that it's rising. And so it's kind of playing on that idea of such an insignificant amount causing so much change.
And there's also all of the other changes that go along. It's not just water swallowing land. It's a chain effect of what goes on.
Exactly.
Ed, tell us about how you got involved in all this. Your background's pretty extensive also, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so, I'm a photojournalist and a filmmaker, and it's interesting. This issue is not something that I was consciously involved in, but over the last, I'd say, almost 3 decades of working around the world, and I've done a lot of work in the Middle East and done stories for National Geographic on, water problems in the Middle East. Over time, it sort of crept up on me that this was an issue and that we really had to address. And then I was one of the photographers that covered Hurricane Sandy for Time magazine, and I, before that, did the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which were more overt examples of how, let's say, dramatic manifestations of these changes taking place. I see this as one of these issues that shouldn't be viewed. The prism in which it's viewed, the discussion is really off base. That this is, I don't really care if it's man-made or not, or what this is about is these changes are happening. And they're going to have really negative effects on not only our planet, but on people. And that I truly believe that if we come together to use our intelligence and technology and innovation, we will not only, help to mitigate the ill effects of climate change, but I think we'll also create a hell of a lot of jobs.
I want to just comment. I like the fact that you said this issue crept up on you, because that is what's happening with things like sea level rise. And, and I think a lot of people aren't consciously thinking of it. And so it's creeping up on a lot of people.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm glad you touched on it as well, because when I've been out on the Eastern Shore, it's a community that doesn't really love the idea of the science of sea level rise. They like to combat it. But what I ask is, well, what do you think's going on? And they have plenty of answers, but it all comes back to a central theme. Something is happening, whether it's natural or man-made. They see that their yard gets flooded more often. They see that there's more storms and the tides are higher and washes out the road. So everyone knows that something's happening, and you can debate that process to an end. But where I'm starting from is a point after that. And I'm saying, okay, we all know something's happening, and what I'm documenting is how that's affecting the people that have lived there.
How do we differentiate climate change photography and the broader subject of our mistreatment of the Earth and its resources?
I actually don't think we should differentiate. I think they're all related and overlapping. And like I said, I was very interested just in environmental issues prior to starting this project, and so it was something I was very conscientious of. But I think it's all interrelated. A lot of times when I give presentations, I don't necessarily always just say this is a climate change effect. I talk about the problems we have in the environment. So I think it's important to keep it kind of all in the same pocket to talk about.
I look at a lot of photographs of climate change. If you go to sites like Gizmodo, they always have these wonderful GIFs of, here's 10 years ago, here's today. And it's very graphic. If you can't see what's happening, it's rather startling. And it takes a lot to me of a good photograph to really illustrate that. And looking at each of your work, it's striking to see how it is. But you wonder at some point, are we looking at pictures that are pretty pictures that are frightening? And it's a difficult thing, I guess, to tie in your pictures to what's really going on. Thoughts about that?
So last year I worked on a short film for The New Yorker with the great Matt Black, a photographer based in the Central Valley of California, about the drought in California. And, I lived in San Francisco for 25 years, and it's pretty dramatic what's going on there. We were seeing, huge orange grove trees being dug up by, tractors, and wide swaths of land in what is really the most productive agricultural land, certainly in America, if not the world. Until we're really honest with ourselves. And again, what I also hate is this idea that somehow if you believe in climate change and you believe in trying to figure out how to be better stewards of the earth, you're anti-business. I think it's a bunch of crap. I want businesses to succeed. If businesses and corporations don't succeed, I don't get much work as a photographer. And quite frankly, my neighbors won't have jobs, and on and on and on. So we have got to get away from this sort of, it's a polemical argument that is disingenuous, doesn't address the facts and reality on the ground. And what it ends up doing is dividing people. So instead of having people working together, and I don't mean to be so idealistic, but I'm sorry, it's the way I feel, and it's the only way to have any hope, and to instill this in our kids and in the next generation, that figure out a way to talk about this thing in a collaborative way.
Here we are, photographers, trying to use our craft to make a change. I know that when I go visit my son in Ohio, I drive through Pennsylvania, and you see these large billboards there that say essentially the sun sets, but coal is forever. Now, I happen to love that. I'm saying to myself, obviously there is a strong interest in keeping the coal industry alive in Pennsylvania, because in parts of that state, that's all that there is. How effective can photography really be when you have this kind of a mindset going on, in not just Pennsylvania, in many, many places? There are a lot of interests that are economic and are political, and can we really use photography to make a big dent in that?
I think we can. I think it needs to be honest, straightforward photography in that sense, though, because a lot of what I end up seeing is here's a disaster scenario, what New York's going to look like in 200 years, and then you see the Statue of Liberty half underwater. And that kind of exaggeration, that kind of, let's see all the monuments underwater is harmful because people look at that and go, well, that's not going to happen. And then they don't believe the actual problem of what's going on. So instead of showing something that's nuanced and complex, everyone just goes for the extreme. So while, you see that ad that says Coals Forever, we all know that's not the case, but, we need someone to come out there and show images that get to the heart of the matter, but don't exaggerate, because I think exaggerating the issue also is hurting. I'm actually trying to get access to a place that's been burned a few times by newspapers in terms of talking. It's Smith Island. And so I was just having a conversation with one of the women who runs a bed and breakfast. And I said, look, I'm not gonna be dishonest with you. It has to do with environmental changes and things like that. But my focus is on the community and showing how special this community is, because they're wonderful. I mean, there's only 280 people out there.
Wow.
It's
really
this
small.
wonderful place. It's the last inhabited island in Maryland, Chesapeake Bayside. It's really great. So when going through this long conversation, I said, well, why don't we get some people together, like the people that are the influencers in town. And so when I get there, we can all sit down, I can explain this to them, and we can work something out this way. Because otherwise, it's kind of going in there and talking to them about climate change. They're like, no, we've already had all these places come here and burn us.
They're certainly not to blame at all. And I found, trying to talk to people about drought, I stopped to talk to a dairy farmer, and I just asked him, I said, I was just curious. So I was just driving by and I saw, when your cows come out of the barn, they're getting, the spray of water. Can you just tell me what that's about? And he's like, I want you to know I reuse that water 5 times. And I said, that's amazing. Tell me about it. How do you use it? Because he thought I was there to point fingers. I was like, I'm not blaming you for the drought.
Right.
But, people are very sensitive,
Totally.
Especially in California, the water issue,
When you say that they were burned, what do you mean by that?
So once again, it's this extreme view of this place. They might actually be a little bit safer than some of the mainland areas, but they are dealing with a significant amount of erosion. And so there are changes happening to them. And they know it because they have the Army Corps of Engineers building a wall several miles out into the bay to protect them from the oncoming water. Yeah. So they do realize, and no one's going to say no to that. But they also, somebody comes into town and says, hey, I want to do a story about Smith Island cakes, which is Maryland state cake. And they go there and they use that as cakes are rising, land is sinking. And they go, oh, that wasn't really what we thought.
The story.
So it just becomes this economic story about, and I get it. It's one of the, you're either a waterman or you make Smith Island cakes there. it's really the only 2 industries there.
I know a lot of your work, I was looking at your site earlier, you've been around to a lot of different locations.
Yeah, maybe not as many as that. But I purposely chose to also cover all 7 continents with the witness tree because I really wanted to show the global connections. And so I had a sabbatical year from teaching where I traveled continuously for 9 months. And I also wanted it to be continuous. I didn't want to do a lot of back and forth flights. Conscientious of my own carbon footprint in doing this project, but hoping that by getting the message out, it's doing a greater good, I hope. But
by the way, I'm big into biking.
Yeah,
so,
me too. Well,
there we go. Very good. Thank you.
And actually,
and I'm totally jealous.
Yeah.
You had 9 months in.
Yeah. Which also really got me into space to really, focus on this project. And I'm sure Ed can speak to this too, that the climate change denial, and I say this now with some authority, is really strong in the U.S. and not elsewhere. When I went to China, I said, can I talk about climate change here? And people wanted to talk about climate change with me.
Now, here's a question that we were wondering about, and that is that a lot of this involves traveling to places that are not exactly easy to get to. And also, you could be stepping on toes for political reasons and economic reasons, too. What is it like getting to access to some of these more extreme places? And what are some interesting little roadblocks you might have run into along the way, or surprises you might have run into along the way while trying to get these images?
I could not have done this project without the help of strangers because, I was traveling alone as a woman, and a lot of times there were men in their 70s who kind of took me on as their daughter and just wanted to help, see me safe. And so getting to the Mingyang Glacier in Dichin, China was a difficult place to get to. No one spoke English. And so there was a group of Japanese tourists in their 70s, this group of 4 men, and one spoke a little English and one spoke a little Chinese. And so they managed to get me to, a taxi driver to get me to this one glacier. And I hiked up by myself. And then when I came down, they were all waiting for me. And the Japanese men would not leave until I was down safely. And they started clapping when I got to the bottom. It just buoyed me to feel that, and they knew what I was doing, I explained what I was doing to them, but that people really want to help you get your message out and do it safely, So there were places I did feel a little unsafe, but that, again, was very minimal. And for the most part, I felt people were very supportive of what I was doing.
Ed, you've been to a lot of places that FedEx doesn't deliver to. You must have seen some pretty extreme things and hit some crazy roadblocks along the way.
Well, the thing is, though, I can't remember who already said this, but it's really only in the United States where, when I've worked on a couple of drought pieces for the New Yorker where, it's like you can't say this is a story about climate change. Everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I had that in the Central Valley. I had to say I'm doing a project about the drought.
Right, exactly. And so it's, again, our sort of political dialogue in this country is so sort of stunted by extremism and also this polarization. But we all know this. But, anyway, but out in the world, I've not had anybody stop me or get in my way because I might have been doing something that was related to a drought or climate change or anything like that, It's really just in the United States that we have to deal with this.
You have anything to?
But I do want to say one thing.
Go. Yeah,
which is sort of going back a little bit, or maybe not. But is that I think it's also really incumbent upon us to find ways to, as visual storytellers or artists or whatever you want to call yourself, to show how it's possible for change to happen. So, for instance, when I think about the coal country folks, where, again, they come from a really proud tradition of people who do a really hard job, and at some point in history, we were really dependent on them doing that job, and they risked their lives and their health for the sake of having a cheap source of energy. So now we know not only is it bad for the workers, but it's also bad for the environment. But we can't just leave these people stranded. They're good people. These are good communities. They're the bedrock of this country in many ways. So I would love to see stories. I wanted to work on a story earlier this year, and I couldn't do it in West Virginia, sort of the heart of coal country, where, people are realizing this and they're taking matters in their own hands and they're getting retrained and they're starting, they're finding new businesses and jobs to do. Well, it would be great to do a story. Now, they might not be sexy pictures. I don't know, be a challenge. But those are the kinds of stories that I think are really important to get out there, because I really do believe that if all we do is show the negativity and hopelessness in the world, we will not only lose our audience, but we don't really achieve very much. I mean, there's obviously bearing witness is incredibly important, but I think part of what we have to do is also tell stories that engender hope and that show how there are solutions and there's another way to look at things. So maybe if you did a bunch of stories about how people in the coal country are now turning to new crops or new jobs, then the next generation of people out of that area and people outside of that area will go, oh, well, all hope's not lost, or hey, let's invest more in those things so that we bring people along instead of leaving them behind.
You bring up an interesting point. Now, we have 3 photographers here today, each of you dealing with climate change, and there are other photographers out there working to the same basic goal. At what point do you say to yourself, or do you read enough, or do you realize that we might have gone too far, it might be too late, and do you find yourself saying, I might be just doing something that's futile, or do you know people who have hit a wall and said, I don't see the purpose of trying to do this anymore. We missed the boat.
Well, with my story, there is this concept that a certain amount of damage has already been done, and we're going to see where sea level rises in the next 50, 100 years and how much of that peninsula will be taken away. But the idea is it's kind of like a cautionary tale that hasn't happened, which you don't get to see that often. So you're documenting something as you know what the disaster to unfold will be, but you can actually photograph before it happens. And so it's an idea to say, let's, talking about community again, there's a lot of opposition out there to me using the word climate change, but there's not opposition for me to be out there documenting this wonderful historic community that's, absolutely necessary to preserve. And so approaching it from that angle and talking to people about it from that angle, they're much more welcoming. They want to see their community grow and thrive, and they want to see it stay around. So that's how I approach it. It's not an argumentative thing that I come in there. It's more in support. It's more, to hold up this community and say, we don't have many historic communities like this anymore. This is important. And so being able to show that, for me, is the idea that it can help shape opinion for future loss, rather than saying, let's stop this where it is because there's a certain amount that's already going to happen, but more can happen and it can get worse. We're not hitting rock bottom. There's still more that can go. So my photographs are supposed to show this community and have people say, oh, you know what? Like, we saw that happen. We don't want any more too.
I also feel that I will continue to keep photographing the effects of climate change. I'm not doing the mass amount of traveling I've done. I'm trying to stay more local. When I go someplace for vacation, I'm always like, what's the climate change issue here? Sorry, I have to go photograph for a few hours. But I am focusing on solutions. So I'm rolling out a new website, thewitnesstree.org, and chapters of 3 at a time over the coming weeks and months. Trying to, draw people into that issue. But my final chapter is actually on solutions, and it is going to be the next project I do, where I hope it's going to be much more locally based. So I will stay in here in New York, and I'm going to be looking for photographers to help me in different places around the country and really have it, or at least start with it, with community-based solutions in the United States, again, because we have the most work to do to change opinion. I don't have a sense of hopelessness. People tell me what I've been doing is important. That always, gives me stamina and encourages me to go on. But I'm definitely interested in, and I'm getting more involved with communities like the permaculture communities that are interested in change and just going forward. And I almost feel like, let's just leave it all behind. Let's just think forward and move forward.
Good points.
Yeah, I never find any photographer or journalist, for that matter, who feels that it's hopeless or they've given up. So it's interesting with the Everyday Climate Change feed, which was started by James Whitlow Delano, who's an American photographer based in Japan. Talk about community. You've got, I don't know what the number is, 30 or 40 or more photographers around the world that represent all cultures, religions, maybe not all continents. And, we're all contributing to this one feed, not getting paid for it, obviously. And it's pretty cool, I think. It's an example of the photographic community coming together. And it's interesting, almost every time I post, I lose some followers. But
that's okay.
And I figure it's because I have, hashtag climate change. So I think it's really, and, James is amazing. He really should have been here. But he's been able to get us exhibitions in Italy. There's another one coming up. I can't remember, just today I got an email from him.
James
Whitlow Delano.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
This feed is such a great example of how the photographic community can come together, not for financial gain, and really pool our minds, our work together. The one thing about posting for this feed is it's incredibly important that your caption information is tight, and because it's some have not been. I hope none of mine have been that way. We work pretty rigorously on getting it right. And sometimes it's reactive. Like a couple of months ago, the Times came out with a story about flaring. Flaring from oil facilities was like, I read it and I was like, oh my God, I've photographed that in a bunch of places in the world, particularly in Nigeria. So I immediately said to my studio manager, take this article, grab the important bits that make it timely and, the facts. And because it's a huge polluter, gas flaring from oil facilities, and then, go through the archive, pick some pictures. So to me, that is exciting. Mm-hmm, and again, I'm not getting paid to do this, but it's like, this is why I do what I do, that I might have images that can inform or inspire or educate. And the other thing is that, again, I really do believe this. If you change one mind, you've had an impact.
Right.
And I'm
good
sure
point.
we're
Very
changing way more than one mind.
Well, not even our changing. That's why I'm saying, like, sometimes preaching to the choir is the best thing, because what we need to do is take the people who already have the subtle interest and knowledge and awareness of climate change and get them more involved.
Yeah.
So, and then let them work on their families.
Yeah, no, it's true. But, the idea is let's move away from the polar opposites of the conversation and find a common ground so that we can have a more substantive discussion that moves us forward together.
It's about responsibility is really what it is.
Well, and the politicians are they have a huge climate change is one of those things, unless you live in a place where you're directly impacted by it, it's kind of one of those things that's out there. Lots of things to worry about in life, right? But anyway, I just feel that we're really not being served well by our public servants on this issue.
Before I fold up into fetal position and start rocking silently and humming to myself, I find it interesting that we're having an audio discussion about visual images, which is always kind of a funny aspect of this show. And if each of you can give me an example of something that you witnessed on this journey that really struck you and or shook you about what's happening climate-wise, something that you photographed or maybe just viewed. Because again, we're looking at pictures, and quite often iceberg pictures are pretty cool. The fact that you just had this thing the side of Manhattan fall off an island is a whole other thing. But what things have you seen that struck you the most about how the world is changing now?
You want to start, Greg?
Sure. So a couple Octobers ago, I took a flight over the Eastern Shore to kind of get some aerials of different landscapes that are out there. And crossing over the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, what I saw, and I got this picture as, the sun's coming up, there was fog that day, everything worked out just great. But what's there is you can see this path of water that's cutting through some of the area. And then beyond that, you see all the dead trees because they've been inundated with salt water. And then beyond that, you see the trees that still have leaves on them. And it was just this perfect progression that you could see. It's very slow. It takes years to happen, but you can actually see what comes next. You can see the progress of where the water is going. And eventually it goes from trees that are full and alive to dying to dead to marsh to open water. And there was that exact process happening right there, all in one scene. So that to me was just here it is. If there's any more proof that you need, this is it right here. You can see what the chain reaction is.
Almost like a graph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, I think of 2 or 3 things. One was last year working on the California drought piece, where we decided to do an aerial of the Central Valley, and I mean, there it was. You had, I don't know, is it 50,000 acres, but or more, tens or hundreds of thousands of acres of land that were, 5 years ago, all green, and you had a checkerboard of brown and green. So you're talking about billions of dollars also of lost profit from that. So that was a very graphic illustration of how the drought in California is impacting things. Another would be just to have a day in Delhi in pea soup air, where in India, or a number of Indian cities where you don't want to breathe. It's disgusting, and that's because of all the pollutants from burning fossil fuel. So those are the sorts of things that always. Well, anyway, those are the sort of graphic illustrations I can think of. And of course, in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where you're in this gorgeous, one of I think the third largest wetlands in the world, and so much of it is decimated. You have the flaring, and again the odors and the impact on the foliage, on so much arable land is lost. There are very real impacts from this.
For me, it's probably after fires in East Bastrop, Texas, which is just a little bit outside Austin, Texas, in 2011. I was down there actually photographing a wedding, which has helped fund many of my trips, gotten me to places, and I decided to go photograph in this community that had been just wiped out. 1,500 homes were burned by wildfires in the third year of the drought. And there was no one around. Everyone had been evacuated. There was no homes. But I just walked around these communities, and it was so sad to me. It was the saddest time because there was absolutely no sound, and it took me a while to realize why I felt so unsettled. I could still smell the smoke, and there were fires burning nearby, but there was no birds or bees, no children, obviously, no voices, and it was almost like the quietest I'd ever heard a community. And to me, that was the saddest part, and it really just tore at my heart to be there and realize so many people had lost their homes to this wildfire. And, the drought and the wildfires continue everywhere. And people just don't want to see the connection. And I do want to acknowledge that not every disaster, not every natural disaster is connected to climate change. And we know that. But all these things are increasing. I think that definitely bears saying, because people say, well, how can you say that was related to climate change? But I think it's all related. And
definitely
storms are
influenced in many
increasing.
instances.
Yeah. So all these things are changing. I mean, it was 64 degrees yesterday on November 16th in New York City. It's beautiful, but it shouldn't be.
Do you have a problem with that?
Did you finish the wedding, by the way?
That was before. I do my job and then I do my art. So.
Oh, that's great stuff.
But that'll happen, right? You have a cold winter, and then people are like, there's no climate change. There's
no global warming.
No global warming.
It's climate change.
Right. It's just not as simple as that. But again, I wish the conversation would move away from, our direct relationship to climate change, and the fact is that we have to find sustainable forms of energy, because I also believe it's going to create so many jobs and innovation and technological development that will benefit humanity.
All right. Any last remarks from anybody? Want to throw in there little thoughts you have on the subject?
I just want to give a shout out to people who are doing really great work. Gideon Mendel, who's doing the Drowning World Project. I got to speak to him via Skype and was very motivated by his project. The Canary Project is a group of artists who are doing more fine art-based projects and activism-related activities. So I think there are a lot of us out there, and I hope that we can continue to, grow a community of photographers that are concerned with this. I have my students all working on issues because we need to do that.
Everyday climate change, it's a great way to get people together to kind of cover things in a larger sense instead of bits and pieces here and there. And I love the idea. I love the idea of other photographers that are concerned, that are doing this kind of work, to kind of come together and maybe put together a project on a larger scale.
Yeah, that would be very exciting, is to have a sort of a museum or some large public art initiative where someone curated all of the work that photographers around the world are doing about this issue, because you would invariably learn so much about the subtleties and nuances around this issue, that everything isn't so blunt and black and white.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, John Harris, our producer. Jason Taples, our engineer. For more photo news and reviews, check bh.com/explorer. Follow us on Twitter at BH Photo Video, and email your questions to podcast@bnhphoto.com. My name is Alan Weitz. Thank you all for joining us today.